Hello and welcome to this special presentation from Story into Screenplay. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Gerald Hanks. I'm the founder of Story into Screenplay. Story into Screenplay offers script analysis and one-on-one consultations with clients in every stage of the screenwriting process. And my guest today is Jen Grisanti. Jen is one of the top story consultants in Hollywood. She has worked with legendary TV producer Aaron Spelling on such iconic shows as Charmed, Melrose Place, and Beverly Hills 90210. She was also a development executive with CBS Paramount, where she worked on shows such as NCIS, Girlfriends, and The 4400. And today we're going to talk to Jen about her wonderful book, Storyline, Finding the Gold in Your Life Story. And first off, Jen, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Okay. For those people who may not be familiar with your work, can you tell us how you got started?
Yes. So as you mentioned, I was a 12.5-year studio executive, and Aaron Spelling was my mentor for 12 years. And then I was a 13-year writing instructor for Writers on the Verge at NBC. And I did that alongside opening my own business, Jen Grisanti, Inc., where I do script consulting with one-on-one consults and seminars, teleseminars, digital products. And that's been going since January of 2008. I've written 3 books, as you mentioned. Storyline was actually my first book. So Storyline, Finding Gold in Your Life Story. Then I wrote a TV Writing Toolkit. I just did a 2nd edition of that, and Change Your Story, Change Your Life.
Now, you open up the book by talking about log lines. Some writers can make the task of creating log lines a lot more difficult than it needs to be. What would you tell aspiring writers is the most vital element to creating compelling log line?
I think so loglines are a huge part of framing your story. So for me, I've learned in my experience that when you have a well-written logline, it tells me whether your script is going to work or not going to work. So I feel like there is a lot of weight put in what do you put in the logline to sell the idea. For the writers that I work with in Storyline, Finding Gold in Your Life Story, what I heavily go into is the formula, which is setup of who, create empathy, dilemma, action, goal, twist of irony. And I know that sounds intimidating for a lot of writers at first to figure out, how do I get all that in a log line? But once you do, the value of that is it gives us everything we need to know what's involved with the story. So that's what motivated me with that, is for fiction, as well as I have something called Logline for Your Life, which is how writers can draw from their lives through utilizing the same formula: setup of who, create empathy, dilemma, action, goal, twist of irony, but you're drawing from your life. So you're looking at your emotional truth, and then you're going to add fiction to it in the scripts that you write.
Now, in the book, you use, again, these elements that you just mentioned: setup, dilemma, action, goal, twist of irony. And in the book, this wonderful book, that you use these traditional story structure elements to guide writers through their process. Now, what are some of the methods that writers can use to apply these methods and mine the gold out of their true stories?
I am always looking for, whenever I watch a film, whenever I watch a series on streaming or a series on network, I'm always looking for the moments of emotional truth between the characters. So the value of understanding how to mine the gold from your own story is when you are willing to access your story. Then you go to a place of depth that you can add fiction to in your writing. And then the writer is able to take us to that place between the fictionalized characters, and we can feel the authenticity of what is being expressed. So there is a tremendous amount of value in mining from your own life, because so many people will be like, I've worked with many writers who will say, well, I haven't had that much trauma happen in my life. Like, what if I don't have enough to say? And it isn't about that. It's about mining the small moments. It's about mining moments like when your sibling got into a college that you only dream of getting into, or when you have a friend that gets further in the job world than you do. Like, it's looking at these moments and drawing from the emotion of these moments. So whether they're small or whether they're big and involve a divorce or a death or anything that we know millions of people are going through, then you want to think about, how do I mine this in a way that I can utilize it so that I can go deeper with my voice than the expectation. And I think pushing the envelope and going to a place that we don't expect is what great writing is all about.
And also in the book, you open up a lot about, as you said, these kind of personal moments, these personal setbacks. And you talk about your divorce and your professional setbacks that you had when you were let go, when your employment ended at some of these companies.
Yes.
What advice would you offer on how writers can channel these negative events and this negative energy from their setbacks into their writing?
So I've come to learn, certainly in my experience of being in the corporate world for as long as I was, of creating my own business, that we're all moving through the different phases that we go through in life. And when you are looking for success and in defining, the key to it is defining what you want. So I have learned with going through what I went through, as you mentioned, and yes, my contract was not renewed. So when you go through the life experience, for me, that was a monumental moment, because I was near the peak of where I wanted to go in my career, which was to run a studio. So I was a vice president of current programming, and that moment interrupted what my plan was, as it happens for many of us when our dream gets interrupted. So when your dream gets interrupted, the monumental feelings that you go through with hitting your all is lost are so valuable as far as understanding how to move forward. So for me, it became about, what am I going to do with all that I learned from the top executive producers in the business, from having a mentor such as Aaron Spelling, and from covering 15 primetime shows? What is all that information? What am I going to do with that? And that's what led me to open my own business. And that was the best thing that has ever happened to me. And then I wrote 3 books, which was also a dream when I started my executive career. So the irony being that it took a bad thing happening that felt bad in the moment, but I later realized it was the best thing that could have happened. So that's the message that I like to pass forward to writers, that when we hit those rock bottom moments, that is when we grow. And when we grow, we connect with our voice. And when we connect with our voice, then we have something to say. And when we have something to say, we connect with our audience.
Now, the book wraps up, the mini spoiler. Basically the end of the book talks about the message of the story. And now, what would you say to writers who focus more on delivering a specific message than on telling the story through characters and conflict?
I think now there are so many ways you can strategize how you're going to build your story. So story therapy is my newest angle that I'm working with writers on. And story therapy goes into how we draw from the past and do the emotional work in the present so that we can get to the future dream. So what I'm finding with story therapy is that the series that are working at the highest level are series where we feel the trauma from the past, we get how the present plot allows an opportunity for the character to heal. We see how the flaw can get in the way of the dream, and we see the arc of growth that happens through the series. And when you look at that arc of growth, then that helps you, that helps the audience with the message. So when we're, for example, I just watched a show on Netflix called Intimacy, and it, I believe, is in like the top 10 shows right now on Netflix. It's from Bilbao, Spain is where it's filmed. And the message in it, when you watch it all the way through, had a different angle. Like when we look at Pam and Tommy, that was done, that was based on a sex video that went in one direction. Well, this show goes kind of the opposite angle of when a sex video can destroy a future, which was also loosely explored in Pam and Tommy. But in this one, the women find a way to utilize instead of fall victim to what happens. And the message is so powerful in the recognition of, again, as we talked about, bad things happen. And how do you take something traumatic that happened and turn it into a positive message? And when writers are strategizing, understanding that arc of growth so that you can get to a message that the audience feels, that's crucial.
And you talked about like Netflix shows, like I said, especially the show Intimacy and Pam and Tommy on Hulu. Now we're talking about a lot of the streamers, how that's kind of opened up the market. As wonderful as this book is, it was published in 2011, so it's obviously before the real advent of streamers. If you could add or rewrite some of that book today, what would you add or revise?
Oh, that's a great question. I love that question. I think I would add versus revise. I think when we look at how we all experience story. So for me, I've been working in story for close to 30 years. And I see story in a way that anyone who's been exposed to story for a long amount of time, you recognize the more you are exposed to story, the more clearly you see it. So when I look back at where I was in the life process at the time that I wrote Storyline, which was coming off of a divorce and also coming off a life shift that was unanticipated, and diving into the terminology of story that I did in that book, I wouldn't change that, but I would say what has evolved since I wrote Storyline is the new angle that I take writers into with story therapy is definitely something I'm very excited about, because it is what is being done so much on streaming and also network, where suddenly everyone is recognizing the value of the earlier wound, the value of the opposing parent, the value of the trigger event that happens before we enter the story as part of the engine for the series. So I would say that I would add to a book like Storyline, I would go deeper into how story is evolving in streaming in such a way that we are feeling the message more. We are in the arc of growth with the character. We are connecting with character dynamics in a way that we haven't. I mean, I believe some of the writing being done in streaming and network right now is some of the best writing that's ever been done. So that is what I would do with storyline. I would just go deeper into how story is evolving even further.
You talk about story therapy, and we also deal with, as consultants, we also deal with people who are looking to develop their skills as pro writers, to get into writing for feature films, to talk to producers, to get into a TV writer's room. What do you think are the differences between those two approaches?
To get into the TV's writer's room versus what?
Basically the story therapy approach versus the pro writer approach.
Well, many of the writers that I've worked with, because I did 13 years of Writers on the Verge, and many of those writers are now running writers' room. Many of those writers that I started with 13 years ago, I hear from them and they tell me that they utilize so much of what we went through with my formulas and my story system with story. So when you're looking at story therapy, I would say my approach versus the writer room approach all comes down to strategy and system. So I think that also comes down to the worldview of the showrunner versus the worldview of the person who's teaching writing. So like my worldview is as a studio executive and as a writing instructor. And because I've had the good fortune of covering over 15 top primetime shows, I've had 102 pilots have been sold from the writers I've worked with. My angle is, how do we make the audience feel the story in the strongest way possible? And that angle has been something that I have worked on since the very beginning. So that has evolved, and I have found that when writers go to their emotional well, that's when the sale happens. That's when doors open. That's when people get agents and managers. So it's teaching writers to move beyond the wall of fear of what if I express and, my mom or dad sees what I wrote and it isn't exactly to their liking, and moving beyond that fear and being willing to go there.
Now, I know you mentioned basically using the emotional well as inspiration. Actually, I just interviewed Matthew Khalil and his book, Three Wells of Screenwriting, which was—
That's fantastic. Yes.
Yeah, again, a wonderful book, wonderful guy. Like I said, I just posted his interview not too long ago, and obviously he has a lot of experience in terms of helping writers develop their stories. Obviously, you do. Now, for those writers who are looking for mentors such as yourself to guide them through their writing process, what advice would you give them on what to look for in a consultant?
Well, you definitely want to look consulting wise. You want to look at a person's experience. You want to look at the outcome, like how many people are getting results. That is a very big thing. And you also want to look for your connection with the person. Like you want to look at how do they see story and how does that align with how you see story. And even if it's something that may be different than how you see story, can you get motivated by how they see story? Like, I believe that when consultants do videos, like you mentioned with Matthew, and I know you've done with Pamela Douglas and Chris Vogler, like when you do videos, the value of the podcast interview is that screenwriters can get a sense of the personality of the consultant and see, is that something that aligns with what I want, what I'm looking for? And I think every consultant also has a different voice from their background that lends to how they bring a writer to an outcome.
Like I said, I just want to thank you so much for this. I think you've given myself and a lot of people some great advice. And
Thank
I just
you.
want to say it's been a real pleasure to get to talk to you today, and hope everyone who's ever thought about writing runs out and gets a storyline. And I want to thank you so much for talking to me today.
All right. Thank you, Gerald. I love what you're doing. And I want to send the message out to all the screenwriters: move beyond your fear, trust your emotions, and go there.
Thank you.